Welcome back to the Walker Weigh-In with Justin and Karis Walker. We're here today to talk about the book How to Lead When You're Not in Charge by Clay Scroggins. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get to talk about this book. I actually read it first before Karis did. I read it in college with the Breakaway Ministries creative team. It was my first semester as team leader on that team. So it was super fun to get to read this book with the other members on that team, see it from a position of someone who just stepped into leadership and seeing a bunch of people figure out team culture not in leadership roles. So we saw this project, saw that the book was on the list, was super excited that Karis was going to get to read it, and now we get to talk about it.
Yeah, so we're here now.
We are here now, and I'm pretty excited to get to talk about it. So why don't you kick us off and just tell us some of the things that you learned in your life from reading this book?
Yeah, well, one of the points it touches on is what is our purpose in life, and so it encourages you to kind of think about that, and talks about how we're created for something bigger than ourselves. We contribute to a greater good than ourselves, and to cultivate good around us in the workplace and just in our life. And we have a mission greater than just making ourselves happy. It talks about this on page 50 in the book, and yeah, so it just made me think of that. And then another big section was talking about ambition and how some Christians, we think like, oh, like, no ambition, that's like dangerous, right? And we kind of shut that down, and we're like, we're just, doing our thing, don't get too ambitious. And then there's people that kind of let that take over and into more a selfish way. And so there's kind of a happy medium there of like, instead of kind of putting everyone down around you to get to the top, like too much ambition, or you're like power hungry or prideful, versus that, again, like squashing it down. Because some ambition is good, and you want that to continue like to better yourself and better those around you, and be the good change and the change that's needed around you. And so there's that fine line there. And so that was on page 66 to 72. And so I just thought that was really important.
Yeah, I think that is a super interesting point that you bring up. And the idea of having ambition as Christians is something that I think can be often misinterpreted or viewed from the wrong lens, because you're exactly right. As Christians, we are encouraged to be humble and to point the glory to the Lord and not to ourselves. But I think there's also something God-honoring and righteous in pursuing excellence in our work and wanting to be good at what we do and wanting to be successful in our career, not for the sake of wanting people to look at us or to make ourselves look better, but because of the fact that the Lord has put us on the earth with that purpose, and because that He has placed us in the role that we're in, and because we serve a perfect Creator, we should want to pursue excellence in that role that He's put us in.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another point was talking about loving your neighbor as yourself. And the verse it quotes, it's from the Bible, Matthew 22:37 through 38. It says, "And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment." And so playing that out is really important in our careers and in our lives, as we lead in loving our neighbors and loving our coworkers and our staff members and maybe our PT techs and the admin, loving them first and starting there, instead of just being like, I want to raise, I want to be more in charge of more people, I want more patience, all those things, but starting there at loving your neighbor as yourself. So kind of prioritizing helping others before you. And so I thought that was a really good point. For sure, just how we live our lives right where we are. Again, this was kind of talking about, like, even if you're not at the top, like, leadership position, but just kind of starting where you're at and leading around you and just being a good follower first, a follower of God and the way you live your life.
So you talk about loving your neighbor as yourself, quoted a book of the Bible, and was something that was heavily emphasized in the book. As someone who is planning to work in the medical field, and so much of your job centers around helping others and being, loving to them just by the nature of your role, how do you think you will be able to go above and beyond that in showing the love of Christ to your neighbors from what you read in this book?
I think it's really important to, this is a point, I guess, later in the book as well, but kind of helping and caring for those like that might even be under you. So like, for example, your PT tech in the outpatient clinic, like appreciating them and thanking them, and maybe like when you have free time, like helping them wipe down the tables or wiping down the equipment, like not just like, oh, I'm just gonna sit here and drink my drink because I have a free moment and they can do it, kind of just treating them like they're less than, but kind of helping them out when they're busy, or just even saying thank you, oh, like thanks for wiping that down, even though it's their job. But yeah, so stuff like that. And if you maybe work in a hospital, kind of building those relationships with the nurses and with the doctors, and talking to them and kind of making an effort to get to know them and all of that, and getting to even know, just like ask them their names and simple stuff like that, I think is really important. And your again, in the outpatient clinic, like your admin staff, getting like saying thank you, don't just like hand out the papers, be like, all right, can you do this, so kind of just, and again, building a relationship with them, like asking them about their weekend or like what they're doing after work, stuff like that. It just goes a long way, and caring for your neighbor and just being a good leader.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely great.
Another point that I thought was really important was where it was talking about what informs your view. And this was on page 120 and 124. But just kind of talking about, like, as followers of Jesus, we should be the most hope-filled people. Like, we should be, just that should be our attitude, like, at work and as we go about our life. We should be hope-filled people and just eager and positive. And that's really hard when you go about your day-to-day 8-hour shifts, lots to do when you get home, no time to work out, busy, but we are followers of Christ. And in Philippians 1:20 from the Bible, it says, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now as always Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. And so we should be hope-filled people, and like we should have that good attitude, because that really does impact people around us, and like it's gonna cause them to be like, well, why are they so positive, or like why are they going above and beyond for me, or why are they putting so much effort and care into my my case, or like my life. And they might even ask us, like we might not even talk about God particularly, but they might even just see that like there's something different about us, and even ask us like, why are you so happy? And we should look different from the rest of the world as Christians. And so doing that, like again, whether you're a leader yet or you're just kind of working, or even just as a friend, like being expectant and hopeful, like if you know Jesus, you are saved, and we get to spend eternity in heaven with God. And so like we don't, whatever happens on earth and in this life, like whether your shift is long or you've had a tough week, like that's as hard as it's gonna get. You're gonna be in heaven with Christ one day. And so having that hope and like that informing kind of your perspective, like keeping your perspective on things eternal, and like that's what ultimately matters, not like if you're just tired today or like it's Monday, so
yeah. And I think something that is very important in that is that it shouldn't be fake. No one wants you to come out here and look at every situation like it is the most positive thing in the world, and to have this fake positivity about you, because that's not necessarily a blessing to you or anybody else, because it would be unrealistic to look at life, to look at work, to look at your coworkers, your family members, and say that nothing bad is ever going to happen, nothing sad is ever going to happen, that every moment is going to be joyful. That's just not realistic. But the fact of the matter is that we do have that hope in Christ. And that should be what we lean on in those moments where there is no joy, to lean on in those moments when it gets hard in work, when it gets hard in school. I'm sure you've experienced moments like that in PT school where it's felt very difficult, but you've had things to look at beyond PT school to lift your spirits and help you through that. And so, in those moments where it's difficult, when it's a hard work week, when you have to tell a patient some bad news that they might not want to hear or you don't want to give to them, how do you think you can use some of the things you learned in this book to approach that situation?
I think just, like coming at it, just compassionately and full of care for the patient, and just trying to encourage them, like, okay, maybe you're not getting better as fast as we thought you would or your doctor said, but like I still see progress in this area. Like you are getting better. We'll keep on working. I'm here with you. Like I'm thinking of new exercises to try for you. So kind of just stuff like that. And then also just encouraging our co-workers, like maybe they're struggling through something or just having a tough week or they're feeling burnout. So kind of just encouraging them, and if they are Christian too, like encouraging them in like the aspect of like, you're doing such good work, like, God put you here for a reason, like you're helping these people, whether like you see it or not, like you might be planting seeds in their life or just things like that. And so encouraging the other Christians around us, maybe in the workplace or like our friends from PT school, maybe they work at a different clinic but they're like feeling those things, so kind of just encouraging them. And I do think like a good attitude in the workplace, like maybe you have like a toxic work environment, like toxic kind of like attitude or culture, like maybe your coworkers are all feeling burnout or just, people aren't getting along. Like I do think like having a good attitude, like it talks about, really does go a long way, and like you help shape the culture of your work as well, and so I think it's good to try to like help shape that culture, like try to be a leader, even if you might not be a formal official leader in the workplace, but at least like you're trying to lead out in cultivating a good work environment.
Yeah, and some might even say that would be being a leader when you're not in charge, as the book leads to in its entirety. And obviously no one from the UNT Health Science Center would be causing the toxic work environment, but you guys are on top of it and remedying that toxic work environment. Another point that you thought was very important from the book was that how we should lead with a servant heart and a humble attitude as Jesus did. We know that was talked about a little bit later on in the book. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, another great point is how we should lead with a servant heart and a humble attitude as Jesus did. And this is talked about in the book, page 190 through 197. And it quotes the Bible, Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8. And it says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant. Being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." And so Jesus, the Son of God, he came to earth in the form of a man and was willing to so humbly and lovingly serve others, even to the point of dying on a cross. And so we should really model that by loving those around us selflessly as well. And this kind of also goes into the point of like, you shouldn't take your position for granted to not serve others, or maybe take people for granted, even if they are like maybe under you, and just kind of being a faithful worker. And God put your boss in charge over you on purpose and where you are at for a reason. And so just kind of thinking about all of that.
Yeah, so in the last sentence there, you mentioned something that I would love to dive a little bit more into. Sometimes in positions, we get bosses that we don't like. We don't think they're great bosses. We think the ideas we have are better than their ideas. We think we can do things better. Maybe they're kind of rude, kind of burnt out, a little bit mean. So when we have a boss that maybe isn't the greatest, how can we still learn from them and serve under them even when we don't agree with them?
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, because sometimes, you do get in those situations. And so, a lot of bosses, like maybe there's some things you that they do that you could kind of learn and take away from that and be like, oh, like that's a really good thing I admire about how they lead. Or maybe there's a boss that's not as good that you don't necessarily love. And so you can kind of see some things that they do that maybe you're like, okay, like when I'm in charge of a clinic one day, I really don't want to do that, or I want to do it like this. And so it's good to like kind of evaluate all those things and even like find some place in a Google Doc and make notes about like, maybe some business practices you want to do one day, or some things you want to make sure like you prioritize with your business. And so the book talks about a little bit about challenging authority, which can be needed sometimes on page 206 through 209. And so it talks about like those times where, you might feel kind of stuck at work and you're like, okay, I really like this needs to change. And so kind of how to go about that conversation with your boss. And so it emphasizes the need to adjust how you approach that conversation with the right person, just like with anything, obviously, kind of depending on like how they are as a person, like how you're going to come at them, obviously. You might be a lot more gentle or hesitant if there's someone who's more overpowering or outspoken, or so yeah, kind of just going about it in a humble way. And it talks about like, in the beginning of that conversation, talk about like your good intentions. Like don't come at it at like I hate that you do it like this, and so they're not going to want to listen to you if you come at it like that. So kind of coming at it of like, oh, like this clinic is like so important to me, and like I really just want to make things as best as possible for the patients, and like you do a great job with this, but I over in this section, like I think maybe we do it like this, and like maybe we could kind of change it and then maybe give some examples. So like coming at it with explaining your good intentions instead of coming at it from like a confrontational way of like, why do we do it like this? Or like you kind of accusing them almost, because no one's gonna react well when you come at it like that, and and that's just not gonna go well. So coming at it humbly, like gently, and also asking like curious questions, maybe instead of coming at it like an attacking way, be like, well, like I noticed, I'm kind of new here, I've only been working here a couple months, but like why do we have them check in like this? Like maybe, and asking that, and then being like, well, maybe could we do it this way? Maybe there's a reason they don't do it that way. And so just coming at it like that. But yeah, and then another last point from that, the book, it does mention kind of like why do we even feel the need to lead? And it is biblical. In an article called Christian Leadership in the Great Commission, Foundations for Building Christian Leaders by Andy Pettigrew, and this is from 2021. He kind of quotes the Bible and talks about Genesis 1:28 states, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds in the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so kind of like having dominion over things. And so that's kind of where like we get that leadership role, and it is God-given, and so it's kind of established there. So I thought that was really interesting, and kind of like explained further on the book. But yeah.
Yeah, and that was from the Journal of Christian Leadership. I want to make sure we give full credit to Mr. Pettigrew for that lovely article that he wrote. That pretty much wraps up a lot of the different points from this book, things we found important, but we don't want to get out of here without talking about how we can apply it both to everyday life and to a healthcare setting. We know that this is a PT-focused podcast episode, so we're going to save that for last. First, broadly as an everyday life, give us a quick summary of how you think you can apply things from this book.
Yeah, well, just in everyday life, like I said, or like the book said, loving your neighbor as yourself, loving your neighbor more than yourself, and just loving those around you really well, and just putting other people first, being selfless with your time, and your energy, and and just kind of making the best of where you're at. Maybe you're not president of the United States, but you can make a difference around you, and you can encourage others and help others.
That is awesome. As someone who sees your everyday life, I can confirm that you do that. And now, moving specifically to a healthcare setting, how can you apply the things from this book?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is great as we step out into the clinic soon. Just kind of keeping in mind like the real importance of valuing everyone, showing appreciation to the staff and to those who, like I said, maybe they're admin, maybe they're the janitor, maybe they come clean your clinic after work. Just like really building a relationship and saying thank you, that goes a long way. Or sharing maybe the cookies the patients brought for you, but sharing it with them, because you should know like you can't do it without them. It's a team effort, and just taking that perspective on it, like the clinic wouldn't run without them, and making sure they know that.
Yeah, well, Karis, thank you so much for sharing everything you learned from this book and insight into how you are viewing PT and how you will continue to view it differently from what you learned in this book. Thank you so much. We appreciate it so much. Thanks for listening.
It was a pleasure having our podcast, and see y'all next time.